military core throughout the entirety of the post-Cold War era. We might be starting to see some of that under Biden now, although I think it's too soon to draw any conclusions. The world has changed back to a more normal system. And we're just dealing with like the fallout and the breakdown of the last little bits of the Cold War order now.
It's one thing to say that the US has the ability to move beyond the system. It's another to say that that's what's going to happen. There's a lot of attachment, particularly on the left, to this idea of a liberal international order and the alliance system.
I'm going to challenge that good and hard. I would say that there's no one on the left, until we get to Biden, that has had any clue about what the alliance system actually means and where it takes us. It was abandoned under Clinton. It was never picked up under Obama. So, you're talking 30 years ago. And as to the right, we're in the midst of every once in a generation or every once in two generation political shift in the United States, where the factions that make up the two parties are moving around. And so for the left, it's far more important to consolidate among an identity that is something more than just not Trump. And they're having a hard time doing that. So they've ejected the socialists from the conversation. They've lost the unions. They're just hanging on by their fingernails organizationally. And on the right, the Trump administration ejected the business community and the national security conservatives from the Republican coalition. And we now have Republicans actively calling for defunding of the FBI and the military. We are in a very weird spot, politically speaking. It's not the first time we've been here. This is our 7th political evolution in this country. We're just incapable on the left or the right of even having a meaningful conversation about what we want out of the world. And that is reflected in Biden's policy. Because he said, America's back. We're going to lead again, but we're going to do it with no troops and no money. That's not how that works.
Not a winning strategy. Well, that raises the question, what exactly happened to this military wing of the Republican Party? Where is it going? What is its legacy?
So, when Trump came in, one of the things that Trump's supporters really love about him is he doesn't mind telling people to screw off and firing them. And he really, really, really doesn't like to hear things that he doesn't want to hear. In that way, he's almost an inverse copy of Barack Obama. Barack Obama, when somebody would tell him something he didn't want to hear, that person was never allowed in the White House again. He just shut out information that he didn't want to hear. He hermetically sealed himself in. And for the last 6 years of his presidency, he did absolutely nothing with foreign policy. Trump comes in. He's perfectly willing for the person to come in the room, but then he'll fire them so that they don't come in. And he'll usually do it via Twitter. After 70 years of preventing nuclear war and managing the world, we have a pretty robust diplomatic intelligence and military corps who knows a lot about every part of the world. And so when Trump would do something, he would bring in the people who knew what they knew. But if they ever told him something that he didn't want to hear, then it was a personal vendetta and they were trying to destroy him politically. 4 years of that, and we saw Trump in both the midterms and in his reelection campaign actively campaigning against these factions, both in the business community and the military services, to force them out of Congress, to force them out of his administration, to force them out of the apparatus of the Republican Party. And for all intents and purposes, they are now gone. So military voters are no longer Republicans, they're swing voters, which is kind of a weird position to be in for any faction. But for the Republicans who have been so much a part of the institution for so long, who have built their reputation on being apolitical, it's particularly jarring. Because if you talk to the officer corps, the Joint Chiefs right now, they just don't know what their future is going to be. They have no institutional history in manipulating or participating in the domestic political system. So there is no conversation among the majory green Donald Trump wing of the Republican Party that is now dominant about ever bringing them back. They're seen as untrustworthy. I mean, we've actually had sitting Republican congresspeople call serving generals, traitors because they weren't insufficiently slavish to Donald Trump. They're never coming back to that party so long as that faction is in power. And the business community is out too. So the other kind of big core of what I call the math and maps crowd that has run the Republican Party for the last 70 years, they're no longer even in the institution. There is a possibility that if the Democrats can come up with a meaningful national security policy or a meaningful business party, that both of these functions will jump ship. as opposed to being swing voters. And if you look at the folks that Joe Biden has put in his cabinet in places like commerce and treasury and transport, these are people with real business experience. This is not Obama 2.0, where there was a grand total of 5 years of private sector experience in the entire cabinet combined. No. This is almost Trumpian in terms of bringing in people that actually know what they're doing. But unlike Trump, none of them have been fired yet. So there is a very real possibility that Biden will be able to bring these groups in. It'll cost him the socialist win, but he's in the process of pushing them out of all decision-making anyway. But that's where we are right now. It's very unsettling for somebody who does national security like me to see the entire national security apparatus on the outside. Because in the United States politically, when the factions are all in motion, that's when we tend to make strange decisions. Because the people who actually have some concept as to what's going on are no longer part of the process. People like me in the business community tend to avoid American politics when we can because it's unnecessarily messy. But that means that the people who actually have a concept of the context are not advising the decision makers or are not the decision makers. And one of the big dangers we saw under both Obama and Trump was this disassociation of people who were aware from governance. And that happens when the parties break down. But if the parties are broken down too long, we start making national security decisions that in retrospect were really, really, really bad. And so this is America's 7th reorientation. 3 of them ended in military conflicts.
And do you anticipate some sort of,
I don't have a specific fear right now. I'm just a student of history. I'm like, I've seen this movie before.
Fair enough. Well, I believe we're more or less out of time. There is one other question I wanted to ask.
Sure.
A little bit more of a personal question. Where on earth did you find socks with capes on them?
I collect socks, so I think that specific set I picked up in London.